And your life. Hi, well, thank you for joining us today. We will talk about why is a good idea to get into Flutter, or at least have always a plan B. Our amazing speaker for today, Vahan Hekimyan, Flutter developer at DataArt. You can write your questions in our YouTube chat, and the recording will be valid after I talk. Vahan, stairs is yours.
Thank you very much for the perfect introduction. Yes, my name is Vahan. Today I will introduce a little bit of Flutter, some pros and some cons, and some general idea why it is a very good idea to start Flutter. It's not late to start Flutter now. And as mentioned, you can give questions during my talk or after it, or even you can contact me later after the webinar if you have some other questions later in the future. I'll be more than happy to assist you with your questions on Flutter. So let me start with the presentation. The first topic I would like to cover is the community insights, which will include some of the statistics on Flutter. Here you can see it's numbers, but those are very impressive numbers. As a matter of fact, it's got Flutter so far has got 155,000 likes on GitHub, which has even surpassed React Native, which is currently the main rival of Flutter by maybe some 50,000 stars. There are a lot of followers on Twitter, or X, and there are a lot of members on Meetup. There are being a lot of live websites that are already written on Flutter, and there are more than 1 million applications also using Flutter. And one other very important thing is the packages on the pub.dev. Those are the packages that you can import in your Flutter projects and use them. The number is surpassing 33,000, which is considerably a lot. Those are wonderful packages. And what's one interesting fact about Flutter is that the Flutter community is actually an amazing one. If you go to any of the packages, if you check on their issues on GitHub, you'll notice that the community is just very supportive. They're trying to be very prompt on their answers. If you have any issues that you've opened, you'll most probably receive an answer within a week on your issue. You'll find the Flutter community just amazing. And also, there has been a survey on JetBrains in 2021, during which Flutter was considered the most popular cross-platform framework in the world. This is a very important statement, I think, for Flutter, its community, and the developers. As the next section, I'll talk, as I said, about the pros and cons. Now, this is going to be already one of the main topics. So I'm not going to talk about the cons that involve the problem of Flutter being a new language. It involves, for example, there could be a lot of issues. You can go on GitHub and you'll see some issues are open since 2019, and they are still not resolved. Those are not some complicated issues. Those could be issues that you could stumble upon on your third day writing programs on Flutter. It's just because Flutter is relatively new. It's 3 or 4 years now that it's in public release, so you can't expect it to be without those issues. But as for the considerable pros and cons, one of which I would like to talk about is the rendering. So unlike a lot of other cross-platform languages and frameworks, Flutter is using a 2D rendering for applications to run on separate devices. So the packages that you build are coming with an built-in rendering engine that is rendering your code on the screen. And this could lead to several pros and cons, obviously. The con obviously being the extra layer. It is going to affect the performance, and I'm going to talk about the performance later. It's one of the main topics of Flutter and one of its main goals that it's trying to achieve. But on the other side, the pros is that you can it is very easy to write a platform-specific part of code. It is very convenient to write a project on one device. You just run it on its other device, and there might be even nothing to change. It's going to run exactly the same way as it ran on Android. It will run the same way on iOS, maybe a little bit different on web, but you'll still will have a lot of code, a lot of widgets pre-built that you will be able to use easily on the web as well, just making code changes, just like in this picture. You just check platform is Android or iOS, it's not web, easy. Then we're giving you a row, otherwise we're giving a column. As for the con, so basically the performance, some things I'll tell you on this screen. So there are a lot of ways Dart is combating the issue with the performance, and one of the main methods of its doing so is the very smart context of the Flutter. It's using widget keys connected together with the context that is rebuilding your widgets in a way that it is seamless. So the widgets in Flutter itself are immutable, so you can't change the widgets, but you can replace the widgets. And it's doing, when you see on the screen, you can notice how those widgets are being replaced. Its performance is actually now nearly as close as the native code as one could imagine. But don't take my word for it. You can just try to start a Flutter application. It's very easy. Having the SDK, it just takes one line of CMD code. Just run the Flutter application and just see for yourself. The second pros and cons that I'd like to talk about is the event loop of Flutter and its asynchronous system. It amazingly uses a single thread, which comes surprising for a lot of other people who come from other frameworks, using other frameworks. But it's actually doing very well using that one thread, and it's even being much more convenient this way than now that I can imagine it would do with several threads. Your UI thread is on the same thread that's running the rest of the code. And here on the first image, you can see just a snippet of code where there are several asynchronous functions are taking place. The first one is just calling a loading animation. You can imagine that the loading animation just started now. And the second line is making a call, an API call, or no, I'm sorry, in this case is a native directory call, after which is the schedule microtask. Well, it's in the code that it comes after these two lines, but a microtask is going to process the first before everything else. Later on, it does also an API call that is in the then scope. It is returning the response, and you can work with the response. And eventually, after all that is done, you can stop the loading animation. And it's easy like this. You didn't have to create a separate thread for loading, a separate thread for accessing the directory, second thread for loading an API call. All this is done in a single thread, and it can be arranged very well. And consequently, the con that is coming with this feature is the callback hell, as it is called in the IT sphere, which is practically what's going on in the picture. If you actually look closely, it's a JavaScript code, but it's the same. It's going to look the same on Flutter. What's the callback hell is that you can get a spaghetti code, all that is messed up with the single thread. There are a lot of calls happening. There are lots of states changing, but this is also can be combated if you just export the methods wherever possible. If you write separate methods for every action that you're doing and call them just smartly in the correct order, is going to combat the callback hell, and you won't have this second screen in your applications. The next topic I'd like to talk about is the learning curve and opportunities. This is going to come from my own experience and from other people I've heard their stories. And I think I've got some very useful tips for not just people who are starting Flutter, but also people who are already working with Flutter. So the learning curve is very easy for Flutter. And I'm sorry, I'll talk about the learning curve after I talk about the job opportunities. So as for job opportunities, these four main topics are the ones that I've noticed from my experience are the ones that are most the aspects that are most paid attention to aspects. In every interview, the main thing that the interviewers would stress out was the theory. And I've been also to interviews when I was doing web and previously when I was doing Android development. None of those interviews involved so much theory as it involves in Flutter. And again, I think this could be, the reason for this could be because Flutter is relatively new. And when you're applying to a job where they're gathering a Flutter team, they don't have a Flutter team, the people who are interviewing you might just not have the practical knowledge to ask you practical questions. And they ask you the theory questions that they just Googled 10 minutes before the interview. But this is the current situation. So you just need to have the excellent knowledge of theory before applying to a job, because that's one thing that they are paying most attention to. The second thing, again, as Flutter has some performance vulnerabilities that is just out there, everybody knows this. You're going to be asked questions on different situations where performance could be an issue. You'll be asked how you can overcome those issues. Some can ask, for example, how would you maintain I don't know, for example, talking about threads again, if you need to create a second thread, which is in Flutter is called isolate, how would you do that, and why would you use an isolate in what cases? These are just questions that are just going to happen. Those are unavoidable. And again, since Flutter is relatively new, and again, since some interviewers might not have the practical knowledge, they'll rely on your own projects. So if you have some self-made projects, even the simplest ones, just if you make sure that those are running with a good performance, this is going to be much more important than your answers given during the interview. The interviewers are going to open your applications, just swipe through several of the pages that you have. That's going to be their main way of getting the impression of how well do you know Flutter, how well are you using Flutter. And lastly is the proficiency in several state management services. And I'm going to dedicate a separate topic on state management, because this is also one of the most important topics that even the Flutter experts are yet debating on, and there is just no maybe final definitive answer to what's the correct and best way of using the state management with Flutter, as well as design patterns. Just as I told, the state management, and I'm very sorry. Yep, before the state management, let me go also through the learning curve. You might have already heard, not from me, from elsewhere, that learning Flutter is just easy as it is, especially if you have been doing front end beforehand, especially if you're coming from TypeScript or JavaScript, or even Android or Java. Flutter is going to be just a brush up thing for you. You're going to learn the basics in less than a week, I suppose. Later on, you'll already be practicing some other performance issues or complicated packages and other stuff. And it's just very intuitive and user-friendly. I myself, it took me a month in an office as an intern before I was able to become a junior developer. It was just very brisk, fast. So the one key thing that is going to help you on your learning curve is coming from front-end development. And here I also again included the languages that are contributing to your learning. If you already know Java, JavaScript, C#, I didn't include it, but also TypeScript, and of course also object-oriented principles. The third thing I have included is English fluency, and here it's interesting. I have been learning web in 2015, and I still have some memory of how the processes went, but it was really different from learning Flutter when you know English. The widgets, class names, everything is so intuitive that knowing English is already like 20% knowing Flutter. If you look at a code, a Flutter code that are, it is right to say Dart code, and you don't know Flutter yet, you'll still be able to figure out what that code is doing. If in web you had the div or divs that were containers, here in Flutter, those are just containers. They are called containers. If you want a simpler container that just has size, so it's just a box that has a size, then guess what? We have a widget that's just called a sized box. If you want it to be a box with color, we have a colored box. So you look at the code, you see that there is a sized box which has a height of 1,000 pixels, for example, and inside it has the child attribute that has a text widget that inside has just a string that says hello world, obviously. You just immediately know what that whole code is doing. And even in more complicated code scenarios, still English fluency will just get you understanding of what that code is doing with ease. And the fourth thing, also very important, is the readiness to adapt to Flutter's fast-pacing updates. Flutter is updating just as we speak, just as we're participating in this webinar right now. One day you wake up, you launch your Flutter application, and in the terminal you see that the Flutter has updated to a newer version. And the migration is just easy as it is. And but you do have to follow the updates to be a good Flutter developer. You have to follow up on what is being changed, what is being updated, what is being deprecated. And this is actually key to Flutter becoming a better language and a better framework. I remember in 2020 when I just started doing Flutter, it was a lot different from what it is now. And I believe that application written in Flutter 1, if I chose to migrate it to Flutter 3, that is the current version, it would take me a very short time, but on the other hand, it would make it completely different. It would make the application run much smoother. It would make it look even better. Even if you collect the UI yourself, there are some aspects that it's doing natively if you don't change. So even those things that Flutter is doing by default, those are being improved. So you just have to follow those updates to just keep up. I myself, it's been 3 years, and every day, okay, not every day, but maybe once every 2 or 3 days, I go to the Flutter webpage and just check what have been changed. And on August or July of 2023, this year, Flutter has updated to Flutter 3, and I really dedicated a separate topic for that version as well, because that was a game-changing version update. There's just a lot of amazing things that they've added, and I just wanted to talk about it. Next, as I promised, I was going to talk about the state management. So what is the state management? In your application, you have a page, and it just shows some information. Without state management, it would do nothing else. So you have to have a state management to code your buttons. For example, what is it going to do when it is pressed? What is the application going to do if you want to navigate to a different page? All of that is being processed by the state management. And as you can see on the screen, Flutter community, actually not Flutter community, the Flutter developer team, they've came up with those 3 state managements that you see on the left, one of which, the value notifier, which works with the provider, they actually saw the community contributor do it, and just talked with him and took the code, and they are using it on Google right now, because it was just amazing. It is actually the most basic way of managing the state. And on the right is the community provided packages. And the first one, as you can see, the block qubit one, That one also is actually suggested by Flutter development team, that is one of the most convenient state managements the developers can use. And what's the issue with the state management? Why I wanted to talk about it? There is actually a wrong misconception, even amongst the expert Flutter developers. Uh, they usually take one state management that they like. Same goes actually with the design pattern. And when there is a team and they are the team lead or the tech lead, they are choosing the state management that they favor the most. And this is actually very wrong. And the every separate state management is good in separate scenarios, separate applications. Some are better for one application, some could be even not working for another one. So what I want to actually suggest, advise, if you do start learning Flutter, or if you are learning Flutter, or if you are working with Flutter, in your next project, if you're going to start from zero and somebody comes and tells you that we're going to use Block Qubit because it's just out there, it's the most famous state management service for Flutter, just stop that person right there and ask him to maybe make a gathering a team gathering a call to discuss which is the state management that the entire team is comfortable with. Is the first thing that is most important. And the second thing is which state management is actually the most fitting with the current application, the project that you are going to work with. And I can give examples right now. The set state, the first one that the Flutter community suggested, it is very good to create one single page that's just going to have buttons that change text on your screen and nothing more. If you have an API call with the backend, if you have some native, if you need to get some native code with method channels or providers, set state is going to be a great bottleneck. You'll still be able to do it, but the code is going to be disgusting and the performance will be also disgusting. I don't even want to imagine it. And as for the block and qubit one, those, on the other hand, would not fit a small application. If it has a screen, one screen, if it has three screens, the block and qubit is going to overwhelm your project. And by the way, the difference between block and qubit is just that qubit has a state that you can just change from both the UI or the repository, and your UI will update accordingly. In block, to change a state, you need to specifically send an event that says, okay, this is a loading start event, and the block will manage the event, say, okay, if you gave me this event, I'll give you the loading state, and then I'll give you not loading state once you give me the stop loading event. And as you can see from the description, it would be very overwhelming if you have a very small application. Imagine writing events and states for every little small change that is happening. It won't be convenient. Same goes with Mobix, Getix, Riverpod, Redux, Hive, and all the others. They all fit some specific scenario. Neither of these are good for all the projects. So this is a debate, and this is important to just manage with the team, not go with the random state management. It is going to ruin your experience with working with Flutter. If you're just learning, I'd suggest you start with the set state and then moving with the qubit state management in your learning process. But later on, if you're working with a project, just discuss it with the team, decide which is the best fitting with the team and the project. That will be the best state management that you could pick. And again, as I said, I'd like to also talk about the Flutter third update that came out on August or July this year, I don't remember, and what it brought with it. So first thing is the material free support. It was expected in Flutter 2. There was already a parameter attribute that you could change and it would load material free on your application, and vice versa. If you deny it, it would be Flutter 2, material 2. But starting Flutter free, it is the material free by default. In the third version, it was the foldable mobile device support was added, which is also game changer again, because even I myself, again, I did Android development, and it was hard for me to figure out how the foldable device applications are working if they are migrating from the half screen to full screen. There were several aspects that were blurry. With Flutter, I can say it's easier because, again, I'm not an Android developer now, but for me, it was just much more convenient from my perspective. A gaming toolkit was added, and you can check. There are several games already written by the Flutter development team and also the community. It's on their webpage, and those are looking just good. When you see a game running that smooth using Flutter, you can imagine how your applications would run. Next was a linked package update, and this is not a great thing, but you'll find it very convenient. Flutter has its own default linked package that's just prompting you what's better to do in your code, what's not so good. And if you follow those links with the single package, it's very convenient among a big team. Your code looks the same from developer to developer. Your code merging is going to be much easier because some small changes like line break after closing a curved bracket, it's going to add automatically, and you just won't have to deal with all of those, and it's going to be the same for everyone. So it's also just one of the cool things. There was also simplified Firebase integration. In fact, if you want to use the Firebase backend, it's just one line of code that you paste in the terminal, and your application will be connected with the Firebase. The only thing that is left to you is to take the keys and just copy them from Firebase, paste it in your application, and that's it. Your application is connected to Firebase. The effortless application release on macOS and Linux. It was always possible, but since Flutter free, it's being done much easier, much faster. And I haven't tested it yet, but I've seen on the Google I/O, and it's amazing. The 120 hertz refresh rate support was added, which you don't have to do anything at all. It will just see the current iOS iPhone has the 120 hertz refresh rate capability. It's going to be 120 hertz. You don't have to just write anything. One of the important things was the enhanced lifecycle in web. This changed one key thing is that even on web, you're still getting a 2D renderer that is rendering your application. And when you're navigating through screens, previously it was all being done in the same screen, but with the Flutter free version, now your navigations can happen in the application on the browser, and whenever you navigate back, it's not exiting your application completely like it would do on just a 2D renderer, but instead it's going back to your previous screen if you had one, obviously. Yeah, this wasn't a thing in Flutter 2, and there were some packages combating it. Eventually, the Flutter development team just heard the community calls, the issues opened on GitHub, and added this compatibility. And there was also additional coding syntax options added, and these are being added very often, not even on the major updates. There were things like returning a switch statement, which is actually not perfect yet, but those are always updating, and it's very nice to see that they're working on this. So this was actually all the topics that I had and wanted to cover. Now I'll be just happy to answer to your questions if you have any. And I was also told that there might be a delay, like 10 to 15 seconds. So if I read the questions late and give the answers late, it's just because of the latency. And before you actually give questions, I can also, oh, there is a question now. Let me see. Okay, Carlan asks, what is the best state management for your point of view? Okay, it's just pouring fire, pouring petrol into the fire. Well, my personal favorite would actually be block and qubit, and it's not because the way it works is good, but it's just been there from the start. It's been block is also famous. It has its support for other frameworks like React Native and I don't remember the name, but also for another cross-platform framework as well. So it's being maintained all this time. So uh, a state management that has been worked on for so much time had to be good. But the second one probably, let me open the screen and show you on the screen. It would probably be Mobix. Uh, Mobix provides a very smart widget switching mechanism. So basically, you just put your changing UI elements inside an observer, and you pass them the any variables from the state, and Mobix just knows that if this variable, for example, a Boolean that says this button is enabled or disabled, it's coming from the state and the element is wrapped inside an observer. If it switches from false to true or vice versa, it needs to update the element. And as I told earlier, that Flutter itself is very good at switching the widgets using the keys, and every widget element has a key, so it always knows which widgets it needs to switch, update. With Mobix, it's being done even faster. I don't know how they did it. Actually, I'm going to check it right after the webinar. But basically, now that you updated the Boolean, it will update the element very smoothly, and you don't have to think about things like I don't know, putting an additional provider or managing the state from adding some builders. It all is being done inside a simple observer widget that has the element inside, and the element just follows the Boolean value that comes from the state. So it would be first place block, the second place Mobix, and the rest again depend on the application. And there is a new question. Ernesto is asking, what testing tools and techniques are available for Flutter applications? Well, that is also a very good question. We do have things so-called dev tools, and it's also amazing. You can watch videos on the actually Flutter channel on YouTube, and they talk a lot about the dev tools. At some point, I think it was a year ago, they even wrote separate dev tools for testing using Flutter. So current dev tools that you are using is actually using Flutter to run. It has widget testing, it has performance testing, it has network testing that will show what calls are there being done. And they actually, those testing tools are so precise. You can see they call it a jank. And I'll explain what it is. So you open your application with the DevTools on the side, and you just swipe through a list, for example. You'll see there is a performance check that shows your each screen update time, which is usually a 20 milliseconds interval between the screens, but it will sometimes focus on parts where the latency was more like 100 milliseconds, maybe, how would I call it? Just one screen was at drawn at 100 millisecond speed. It will show it and it will call it a jank. And by following those janks, you can always make sure, and obviously by fixing those elements that cause the janks, you can ensure that your application eventually will have just no latency, no lags. So yeah, those are the tools, and it is also very user-friendly. You can just intuitively, without even learning how to use it, you can just open it up and it just tells for itself what it does. Okay, there are no new questions. Let me think what else I wanted to actually talk about. Yeah, oh, I remember there was something I missed on this screen. That's why I came back to it. About the 2D renderers, there's also a very important thing. Previously, Flutter was using the Skia renderer, and that is the renderer for Android, and it was doing well. It wasn't perfect, but it was good, and it also caused the package, eventual project packages being very heavyweight. But since Flutter 3, the rendering service changed to Impeller, which is the iOS rendering service, and it's just amazing. There are so many new even issue fixes that come with the Impeller renderer. One of the examples is previously there was a Flutter issue that if you have uh, it's called the platform view, a web view, for example. So basically on your screen, you have a little window, an iframe, if you're coming from web, that inside is opening, for example, a native Android screen or a web screen. And if you wanted to have a second screen that is coming on top of that one that has a blur effect, then it would actually gray out your platform view and you wouldn't see what is happening beyond it. But with Impeller, this was actually fixed and nobody actually got notified. Nobody told that, hey, this is fixed. But the second day you just enter your application that had this issue, you just scroll and you see that, hey, I have my blur overlay on a platform view. So yeah, this is also with the help of the fast-pacing Flutter updates. And there is another question from Ruslan. For iOS and Android, are there anything that cannot be implemented on Flutter properly and better go with native development instead of Flutter? Oh, this is a debatable question. And one of such things is actually one thing that I myself stumbled upon during my work experience. It was the background services. For example, if you need a service that is running on the background when you quit the application, well, it's already hard to do it on native Android, but it was much harder doing it on Flutter. Eventually, we actually chose to implement it with Android natively, and there are other things as well. Well, obviously, I can think of, well, for example, also intent. Intent, again, if you're coming from Android, you'll know that whenever you're opening a external application for a certain task, for example, you're sending an email from inside your application, it has the subject, the body, everything, all that information. You don't just want to pass the user to his mailing application, just tell him to, here's your mailing application, just write your email and send it. If you want all that information included, you are using intents that will open the other application inside that intent with passing all that information inside that intended external application. And those are actually a weak spot for Flutter as well yet. But then again, Flutter has the native channel that is used to I don't know, to talk with the native platform. If you just check if the platform, for example, is Android, and I'm bringing the examples from Android, but the same works with iOS, web, etc. So whenever you are, you have, for example, a background task that you want to implement, You would create a method channel that communicates with the native code, and you just write your native code, and they will communicate with each other with the primitive type data types like a string, array, I don't know, anything, a boolean, integer, anything else. Yeah, and even for more complex files and objects, you can use also the blobs. Again, they will communicate with the native code. It will work with Kotlin or Java, and once the Java or Kotlin code does your background service, it collects the information that you want it to be collected during that background service, or you even pop up, for example, notifications. All that is being done in the native, and they can then bring the data back to you via the method channels. So I hope that answered the question. And I actually can't think of other things that Flutter is not actually covering that you would have to use the native code. And that is not because my knowledge is lacking, it's because Flutter has done a very good job of implementing all those possible things you need in your application. They have all the okay, there's another question. Do real-life projects built with Flutter also use Dart for backend code? Okay, as I understand, you can actually write backends with Dart, and that is a feature that was introduced 2 years ago, not earlier. And it works, but I wouldn't suggest using Dart for backend. And no, Flutter does not require for the backend to be a certain language. Any language will actually do, as long as the data types are just the same. Actually, even if not the same, you could do the parsing on the front end side. There should be no problem. In my own experience, I've been using backends that were written in C++. There were ones written in Python, ones also with Java, and all of those it was just seamless. Flutter didn't really care about the backend language. But yeah, your question also included the real life projects use that, and I think my answer would be there could be a dozen of applications that actually use Dart for the backend as well. And it's just not their current objective yet, so it's not the thing that are working on right now. Now, I haven't heard of them promoting the backend being written in Dart so far. I think I didn't skip any questions. I expected this question to be written. Maybe I just forgot to include it in the presentation. There's also a lot of arguing around the Flutter's future, about its support. A lot of people who are new to Flutter, who just considering to start Flutter, they always ask how long could Flutter be supported on all those other devices? Can there be a day when, for example, the Apple will come and say that in App Store we're excluding all the applications that we see that are generated by Flutter? This could actually happen. This is not a thing right now. There are no rumors that this is going to happen, but this is a thing. And the answer to this question is actually quite different from person to person. But in my opinion, I think that Flutter is just going to be there for a very long time. It's a very stable ground right now. It's just you can't go wrong with starting learning Flutter today, because I always was considering, even if Flutter stops its support for devices, all the Apple devices, both iPhone, Mac, would Flutter still be used? And my answer is yes. Even for Android applications, for example, if I were to write a small project today, I would actually choose Flutter instead of native code, because, again, not just because I know Flutter better than Android, It's more that it's going to be a very readable code, again, because of the single thread style and of its intuitive widget names. Everything just suggests that I would rather write an Android application using Flutter that's going to be used on Android only instead of using the native code. And also, one of the Flutter pros that, again, I forgot to mention, again, compared to a lot of other cross-platform frameworks, most of other cross-platform frameworks, they provide just the basics. And as far as I know from React Native as well, they do provide very good basics. But then whenever you need something complicated, you directly jump to packages, which again, they also have a great community, a lot of community contributed packages. But Flutter, on the other hand, comes with a lot of pre-built widgets for you that is natively accessible there. The moment you start a Flutter application, it's in the SDK. You don't have to download, import anything. And only later when you need to draw, for example, a chart, then you would already jump to the packages. This is also very convenient for the learning curve when you just learn to code and don't go on the web searching for different packages that would help you on your current things you're trying to achieve on your learning path. Everything is mostly going to be there in Flutter, ready for you to use. So I guess that's all the topics that I wanted to discuss myself. I don't see more questions popping up. I don't know, I would ask Alina if you think we can.
Yes, Vahan, thank you very much for your topic, for your for interesting discussion with guys. See you guys. See you. We look forward to see you again on our events. Have a good evening, and recording valid after our IT talk. Have a good night and have a good evening or day. I don't know. Bye and see you again.
Same from myself. Thank you very much for joining. I hope this presentation did motivate you to starting learning Flutter if you don't do yet, or if you're learning Flutter, that I gave some tips that you will find useful. Thank you again very much for coming. Hope to see you soon.
Bye. Thank you.